Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Bree. Glad to have all these folks join in. We'll get started, and certainly our main focus today is really about planning migration from Salesforce Marketing Cloud to Braze. I'll caveat the session of like, this isn't like a Salesforce Marketing Cloud bash session. So if that's what you're tuning in for, stick around because we will talk about some of the key differences between the platforms that we see based on our experience. But before we jump in, what I want to do is make sure that we get a chance to really quickly just tell you who we are and our background. So we're Stitch, if you're not aware, Braze-focused consultancy made up of a group of MarTech consultants and technologists over the past decade or more. Our team has built our careers on all things MarTech. So that's in the customer engagement platforms, that's in the marketing automation platforms, that's in the ESPs, email service providers. And it's really focused on customer messaging, customer experience, and how these platforms integrate with one another. And so from a personal perspective, I'm Nick Burgraff, and I'm on our solutions team. As my title suggests, I'm a solutions lead, and the question is, I get often like, what does that actually mean? If you couldn't gather it by the title, is we're really focused on that upfront solutioning, the planning, and the relationship building that goes into really our customer base and how we're helping those customers. Quick credentialing, I've spent the last 11 years in the MarTech space, originally on the client side. So at Target within the marketing operations group, and then at NBC as part of the NBC sports group, before jumping into the professional services realm as a solution architect, and then now doing what I'm doing now. I'm also joined by Steven Rosenfeld. Steven?
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Nick, and hello, everyone. I'm Steven. I'm the VP of Architecture and Delivery at Stitch. So my team's focus is on the strategy, design, and development of marketing use cases alongside our customers. My background, I started in MarTech about a decade ago, started as a marketing cloud solution architect. And so with that, I've got a lot of respect for the marketing cloud platform, actually. And I think it can be really powerful and has been for marketers in the past. But I think I'm really excited to talk with this group today about why Braze is better suited for the marketing or modern marketer today.
Thank you, Steven. So as we jump into it, our objectives for this session are to share why we see brands making the switch, some of those key differences between the two platforms, what that migration process looks like. That's from our point of view. We'll address some of the nuances between the platforms as well. So like what are brands kind of experiencing and where there's potential points of friction just in the changes between the two. And then we're going to provide some really specific things that you can do now to prepare. So knowing that from the audience, like there might be a whole range of where you're at in this process. It might be exploratory. It might be like, hey, this is impending for us. Hopefully some of those action items will be relevant to you guys.
Yep, and we'll finish with open QA. So you guys can feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we'll go through those here at the end.
Cool. So why do we see brands moving to Braze? I think the first one that we want to call out, because there's primarily 6 here. The first one we want to call out is that Braze is viewed as like this true cross-channel platform. They kind of term itself as a customer engagement platform or a CEP. And so what we mean by true cross-channel is it really means that activation of data and events across email, web, mobile, SMS, WhatsApp, and advertising channels are all consolidated into one space within the platform. Does that sound familiar? It probably should. So we'll get into that and like the real true meaning behind that a little bit later. The second one, kind of in the middle top there, is really around real-time orchestration. So Braze places a heavy emphasis or recommendation on the utilization of the Braze web and mobile SDK. Now, the reason behind that is because it really truly powers like direct API access to front-end digital properties, whether that's obviously a mobile app or a web experience or other kind of digital platform experiences that a brand has. And it's going to provide a really fast method of creating those personalized experiences and taking those data and the event properties and turning that into customer messaging. The third one, I think we've heard this from a number of brands, is under the consolidation category. So total cost of ownership on the MarTech space, knowing that there's this ongoing trend of your MarTech stack kind of growing over the course of the years. And then it's like, okay, what do we have here that's duplicative? What's really a point solution? How do we bring that back and reduce the number of technical debt that we have? So I think everybody's familiar with that. There's always a mixed bag of MarTech. There's certain platforms that you're never going to get rid of, and certain platforms that are always up on the chopping block of like, are we really utilizing this to its fullest potential? And as an example, we had one customer that was using Salesforce Marketing Cloud for email, Optimizely for web, Attentive for SMS, Urban Airship for push messaging. And then they had like some homegrown transactional services for both email and push. And a big thing for their brand was like efficiency and total cost of ownership. Like, what can we do to find a platform that's going to power more for us? So we don't have to jump into different platforms and have kind of some semblance of fractured teams there.
Yeah, so I'll take the last three here. The fourth reason we see brands moving over is because they have a long-standing relationship with Salesforce, and over those years, they end up running into contact count issues. They get expensive to pay for customers, prospects, past customers in perpetuity. So unless you regularly purge your instance and have a whole solution built around maintaining those contact counts, that can be very costly. Fifth reason we're seeing brands move, making a substantial shift in data and event strategy. So they may be bringing on a customer data platform or onboarding a cloud-based data warehouse, and those data and event actions become really important thing to reassess in the larger MarTech infrastructure. And then the last one would be marketers looking to remove barriers around data management, process management, and giving marketers a really straightforward approach to their tool set in a modern UI that allows for smarter messaging and faster operational execution when it comes to deployments.
Yeah, and Steven, that one hits home for a lot of our customers where we've got kind of the different teams of marketing operations versus general marketers versus content marketers versus channel marketers and like the email campaign team. Like, just make it easy for those front end teams that are doing execution for like a retail brand that's sending 3 different versions plus the translation and alternatives there per day or even more. Like, just make it really easy for them to interact with and get those campaigns out the door. So let's jump into some of what we would consider the philosophical differences. So we're kind of all on the same page. Again, we don't want this to be overly, like, we're going to get to the migration portion, but we want to make sure we all are on the same page and on the same foundation for why Stitch thinks the way we think. So putting these two platforms side by side and kind of going top down is we see Salesforce Marketing Cloud is data centric. The reason behind that, we'll dive into this more too, is that it's been a long time, right? And it's built on a backend SQL server. So you have the opportunity to create a bunch of data tables, or what you guys all understand as data extensions, versus a Braze, which we view as user centric. And what we mean by user centric, I'm just actually going to like volley this over to Steven because he does a really good job of explaining like what we mean by that.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Whenever I'm trying to think about a platform's function in the ecosystem, it really helps to understand when these products originated and what technology was like at the time. And so when Salesforce Marketing Cloud was first being developed as ExactTarget, it was the late 2000s. We were a decade away from CDPs or cloud-based data warehouses. We were 7 years away from the first iPhone, years away from standardized JSON specifications. And because of this, that product team rightfully focused on data management and creating some data flexibility within their platform. They created an extendable data model, and they did do a good job with that for the time and technology available. Braze stepped into a very different world 12 years-ish later, one where smartphones had taken hold and it was all about interacting with consumers where they were. And one could say, like, of course, Salesforce maintained Marketing Cloud to adjust to that, but that's still an adoption, and you end up with a lot of legacy foundations around that data structure just because of how the technology was at the time it was being built. So um, the brands should expect to interact with consumers on a mobile device first, which Braze had in mind when they developed this, simply because of the time in which that platform was developed. One where flexible data specifications is available. So when we say data-centric versus user-centric, we're thinking about how each platform's foundation is reflected in how we implement them.
Thank you. Going down to the next bullet, there's no question, like we always say this, there's complexity within Salesforce Marketing Cloud because of the power that it has. So it's a powerful tool set, and that goes back to Stephen. We have a lot of respect for it. The amount of customization options that you have in a Salesforce Marketing Cloud are relatively limitless because of the back end that Stephen is talking about and kind of the origination of Salesforce Marketing Cloud. On the flip side of that is Braze's UI. If you haven't taken that deep dive with Braze team and gone through some product demos, hop on YouTube. You'll be able to see them quickly there. Braze UI is largely simplified, and the user experience is much more straightforward. So again, and tying back to that previous slide, is making the marketer's job easier on the front end experience and really kind of direct it that way. But let's move on to the next one, the partner ecosystem. This is one where we think that because of really the market share that Salesforce has, that we're all very familiar with across not just the Salesforce Marketing Cloud, but more so on like a strong, own more than 50% of the market for CRM and in other tangential products that are related to their CRM product. It's a huge portfolio, so it's naturally got an exhaustive network of technology and service partners. On the flip side of that, Braze definitely does have an extensive and impressive catalog of integrated partners that continues to grow like crazy. If you were to subscribe to their email kind of channel on updates to the platform, updates to the SDK, updates to the platform, very frequent that there's announcements for new partnerships, and it's really cool to see because it's every stinking week on our side.
Yeah, and the next item here is, earlier we touched on marketing orchestration and operational management within Salesforce Marketing Cloud. You're jumping between studios and builders in that environment and leveraging components of Marketing Cloud personalization, intelligence, which are additions through acquisitions. So over time, since that day of exact target, whereas in Braze, it's all baked into one unified tool set in a platform where when you say, I want to do a message, you can literally select anything from mobile channels on a mobile device to web push to email, SMS, etc. So the last main difference is how data is integrated and managed between these two platforms. So your Marketing Cloud instance has likely placed a heavy emphasis on SFTP integrations and Automation Studio with SQL. The focus is typically a delayed bulk upload to specific data sets within Marketing Cloud. Whereas in Braze, you're looking at data driven through event collection via the API, with a heavy emphasis on the Braze SDK, whether that be from a mobile device or web, and direct connections to a CDP or modern data warehouse like Snowflake to ingest data directly into Braze in near real time.
Cool. Let's jump into a quick visualization on this too. So Stephen, I'll have you cover this too, but the idea was, especially on that first bullet where we're talking about data centric versus user centric, I think this does a good high level job of kind of outlining that. If you want to jump into this, Stephen.
Yeah, so let's go deeper. When we look at how Marketing Cloud is structuring data. Like we said, we end up with essentially a data schema within each account. We have larger relational tables that then need to be recompiled at campaign level for execution. So we end up with a fairly heavy data management practice, where we'll have larger tables at the enterprise level, say, account wide, and then we end up querying and kind of duplicating that data at a campaign execution level. And then we have to make sure campaign data matches the enterprise level. And that is to streamline the deployments within things like Journey Builder and Automation Studio to make sure that all of the data that is needed is there consolidated into a single table to limit the amount of lookups and things like that that we're doing to keep the account performant. Flip to Braze, where we're using event data structures against a profile, we're creating a unique JSON structure that is attached to your user profile, where we have the flexibility of continuing to provide unique data structure for each account, but we don't have to parse through lots of tables to get to that data or copy that data from an enterprise level to campaign specific table, because at the time of send, whether it's unique purchase data or sign up data, that data is linked to the profile that is being sent to, and so we can do a direct lookup against it every time. Also, within the actual user interface, when we're going to review that data, we pull up a user profile and can see in one spot all of the data that Braze has about that user, instead of needing to comb through a dozen different data extensions and then trying to write queries to do analysis to make sure that we're bringing in first name so that we can make it meaningful data, for example. All of that is streamlined with Braze having that user-centric view right from its foundation.
So for those of you that are like me that need that summarized further, because that goes over my head in some regard, this is the too long didn't read version of it. So on the left side, Salesforce Marketing Cloud, obviously the data model is extensive and it's great for certain brands and certain companies that are going to want to have that technical skill embedded into marketing. So think of like almost a marketing database manager. And that kind of ties back to some of my previous experience at NBC Sports, where we actually had that type of a role that was really embedded into the marketing team, rolled up to the marketing team, but was doing a lot of that database, essentially marketing database management that Stephen is mentioning. And then on the right side, it is Braze offering that less rigid data. So event structured, event oriented, making it easier to build those segments based on things that are happening and events that we can see. So I think that's enough about the key differences between Salesforce Marketing Cloud and Braze. Like we could probably talk on this all day long, just based on folks like Stephen and my background in both platforms over the course of our professional history. But now let's talk about migration. The idea behind your methodology on migrating to Braze is something that I think all of us are super aware of. On like, is this a lift and shift? Is this a lift and optimize? Or is this a messaging transformation? So we don't need to define those. We're just going to make the assumption that we all are really aware of what those mean. But below that, these are what I would call the extenuating circumstances, or those common scenarios that we run into when we're talking about planning a migration from Salesforce Marketing Cloud to Braze. So the first and foremost one is timeline, huge factor. I'd say like 1 in 3 conversations that we have about a brand going down the road of making this switch is going to run into, when is our Salesforce Marketing Cloud contract done? We've had customers that are 3-4 months out from their Marketing Cloud end date. And that's not a lot of time to really rethink messaging or look for key areas of how do we go and improve and optimize. When we're falling into those types of timelines, it becomes okay, let's get this moved and let's get this shifted so that we reduce the amount of risk there. On the next one is like the brand refresh. So think of like we're gonna hit the rewind button to 2020 when like, for example, a GoDaddy switched their brand from do you guys remember all that like that little hand-drawn guy with the weird hair? Like they made that switch in 2020. And now they're if you go to their website, which I think we're all now familiar with their new brand, it's a new color palette, it's a new kind of brand message, and it's a totally new logo. It's kind of like a kind of a loopy heart. And GoDaddy is obviously still the name. The reason I bring that up is rebrand, redesign, refreshes are a ton of work to go and figure out from a CMS perspective and where assets live in all these different places, because sometimes they're hosted in Marketing Cloud, sometimes it's external, sometimes it's all over the board, and then there's a ton of work to go into copy edits. So a lot of things get touched when there's a brand refresh. And so that's something to be thinking about too. If that's coming, if there's a new brand launching within your overall brand portfolio, those things need to be considered when considering, do we make a lift and shift or a lift and optimize? And if we have a lot of time, does a brand refresh give us the opportunity to make substantial updates to that customer journey as well? Stephen, I'll have you jump into the next one.
Yeah, so one of the other major contributions to timeline is data and event projects that are happening at the same time as looking at implementing Braze. So if you're looking at setting up a CDP or moving to something like a cloud data platform, um, setting up a Kafka streaming event service, those applications, that's when we start to really look closely at how we need to integrate properly into your tech stack alongside with partnering with your data and engineering teams to make sure we're following the compliance that your business has built for itself. Um, those things can be time constraints because we are working cross-functionally, and so it's really important to get ahead of that and understand like what is the critical path to onboarding into Braze and what makes sense for longer term sustainability.
Seasonality is another big one. Back when I was at it within the NBC Sports Group, all of our major projects always fell outside of our peak periods for our like full execution mode. We see this with retail brands that have like kids product lines is, hey, we're not touching back to school season. So we're essentially locked down from late June until October timeframe. Like we're not going to do anything major there. There's going to be code freezes. And that also kind of dovetails right into that Black Friday, Cyber Monday. So seasonality, definitely be thinking about that. Major revenue driving periods should be avoided at all cost.
Yeah, and um, I think we're well aware too of this next one with the current economic climate. Like, so if you haven't noticed, Stitch is very active on LinkedIn, right? And it's a great way for us to provide industry and technology insights to our customer base. And each week I open it multiple times, and at least once a week there's consistent theme of a larger organization announcing some reduction in their org. And so when organizations are strapped for resourcing, we're happy to make a blatant plug here to help step in and help accommodate to these things that need to be considered.
Thanks for
One,
the pipeline generation there, Stephen.
yeah, happy to do it. So the last thing that we want to note on this slide here is there's some brands that we've worked with that have like just crazy volumes, and I don't mean that like in a negative way by any means, but there's a lot of iterations of targeted messages with large customer bases, and so migrations can take a while and need to be considered because everyone still has their day-to-day job while they're focusing on um, what this is going to look like in a new platform. Yeah, Nick.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's one time, like one thing that's sometimes missed, both from like a platform perspective, whether folks are moving around to other platforms, is like, I think we sometimes forget, especially in that like services partner space that we're in, like, hey, these people are also like trying to send all these campaigns out. Like their workload was already kind of strapped anyway. And now we're asking them for X number of hours per week to really dedicate on something future, and that work has to go somewhere. So that's just a call out that I think from a third-party perspective, from a platform perspective at the Braze level, like we sometimes forget that, and that's our fault. Let's jump into the next piece here. There's really 4 stages of onboarding to Braze. You do see an open arrow at the end here. That's meant to be like, yeah, okay, are there more stages? Yes, there are, like when we get into the testing go live, but we'll cover that later. But we're focused on preparing for that migration. So the first stage, we're not going to spend a ton of time here because we're assuming that folks in attendance have already started down the pathway of looking at like, what is our North Star? By the way, Minnesota North Stars, I'm native Minnesotan, so I get to throw that into every deck if I can. Establishing those goals, the criteria of what is going to make this a success, and then really defining what are the sheer pain points that we're struggling with, and whether that's really a time to value or operational efficiency, like really laying out what some of the main KPIs that we're going to keep in mind are. Because we always, you're always going to have to loop back with your leadership teams on like where we at, what are the pain points and the friction points that we're addressing and we're not addressing. It's like a constant reminder. The next stage is what we would consider an inventory stage. This is something that we'll talk about in some of the key recommendations on where you can start now. This is a big piece of it. A lot of the customers that we have that have come from a Salesforce Marketing Cloud background have had it for a while, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 years. There's a lot of stuff that ends up being in there for a long period of time. And you have to go and figure out, okay, what does our actual inventory look like versus what's actually inside of Salesforce Marketing Cloud for us now. There's other parts of it that are tangential to the actual platform. Is what does our campaign process look like? We need to really define that because it's going to have to face some modifications based on what we talked about with some of the, call it philosophical differences between a marketing cloud and a Braze. There's going to be things that need to get changed there. We run into some customers that don't have a strong way to really catalog how integrations are coming in, where this data is coming from, what the cadence of data. So anything that you can do to prepare yourselves during that transition process and do that now is really going to help set the stage for what the future state looks like. And we can jump into the workshop here, that workshop session in, what is that, purpley, kind of a plum purple. Workshop is really in the Stevens realm of how do we figure out what future state should look like, what architectural design should look like, where should the data be coming from, and is there a better way to do it? That's usually involved in actual sessions. We call them workshops, which is why it's titled workshops, in diving into all of the mechanics behind data flow and where there's potential latency between a CDP or between an enterprise data warehouse, or if there's a front-end platform that does some manipulation of data. And then on the next portion of that is, what does the campaign process actually look like inside of Braze? Like, let's go deep in and dive into that so that you can reestablish like your campaign process, because it will look different. Now, if you took 10 steps out of that process, 8 of them might still be the same. But anytime you're switching platforms, especially from a Braze UI, friendlier UI, easier use and access, like what can we do to make this go faster and to reduce some friction on those marketing teams? The last portion of this is really based on timing, prioritization, and resourcing. So really having a strong stance on what does this actually look like. Sometimes that's broken out week by week if you can get to that level of nuance and detail. But typically it's more of a kind of a waterfall approach on, there's going to be the portions of your timeline for migration that are like table stakes. You can't move those. They have to be done. Thinking of like the sender authentication packages and getting your DNS set up, like those are like kind of technically easy. but you can't get around them, and sometimes those take some time. Stephen, I'll have you cover the migrate piece.
Yeah, so for migration, we're talking about actual execution of migrating integrations from one platform to another. And so we're really looking to understand the foundations of how Braze should be set up for execution within your active channels and the channels that you want to move into within Braze. This could be within email, so we're talking authenticating sending domains, and enabling your campaign operations team on how scripting changes between the platforms and how that changes given the event structures that we've talked about. In addition to just the how we trigger consumers into journey-esque campaigns, given they make a purchase, they take an action, and we need to respond to that action both by activating them within a specific campaign workflow or driving a, a decision split within a journey. Data integrations would be things like what file feeds do we have going to the SFTP today that we then need to focus on maybe doing a cloud data ingestion component of to get that data into Braze in a more direct fashion, which is a great win because in those instances, the data is never leaving it's never going through a middleware platform, right? So it never has to be extracted, stored somewhere else. And so security teams really love that as well. And then we talk about, reviewing the assets that we have within Marketing Cloud and how we're going to move those over for campaign execution and what the content strategy is going to be there in terms of are we using a lot of content blocks, or are we doing dynamic content within single emails? Do we need drag and drop templated emails, or are we going to do paste HTML? Those things from the executional side to ensure we're creating operational efficiencies for the team ongoing.
Cool. I know we're getting close on time. We do have a little plug here on the bottom. Email me, nick@stitch.cx, if you want a copy of what we look at for our customers from a migration workbook perspective. This helps that both inventory and the migrate kind of portions the two bubbles there because it starts to help catalog that. It's in an Excel or Google Sheet format, just because that's the kind of the easiest method and way to share that. We're happy to share that. So email me directly if you'd like to see a copy of that, and we're happy to send it over. Let's move on here. This portion of what we're talking about, I know we're close to time, so we'll cover this at a high level, but some of the biggest changes that we see our customers really deal with and have to kind of be thinking or managing that change. I'm not talking about organizational change management. I'm talking about some of the feedback we get from certain folks on like, well, in Marketing Cloud, we do it this way. So at a quick high level, this is where like the first bullet there is like we're dealing with the kind of the customer profile data in Marketing Cloud living as a row within a data set. Like here's John Smith and here's all of the attributes we have on him. And then here's all the kind of the hub and spoke model of the relational data of like, okay, how do we stitch this together to really make sense of an audience versus in Braze, we're dealing with what Stephen has shared on and we covered is like you have this user profile that contains all these events and all these attributes that are one-to-one to this member. So our recommendation there and like how you manage this change is really having a strong way to build out an event data dictionary. Sometimes that lives in an Atlassian wiki page. Sometimes that lives as a Google sheet so that cross-functional teams have a good understanding of like what's in Braze, where is it coming from, how are these profiles built? Because if you miss that step, it becomes, the snowballing effect of like, hey, this thing's on and it's running, and it's sending messages, but we don't know where data and events are coming from. So that's one recommendation there. The other one I think we should cover here, Stephen, is really on the AMP script piece. So everybody in Salesforce Marketing Cloud knows AMP script, or that AMP script is the personalization language that's proprietary to Salesforce. Braze operates liquid scripting, which is a Shopify invented language, and it has wider functions because it's open source. So there is changes that are going to be happening from a personalization perspective that is just part of the learning curve of saying, hey, like, let's go and figure out who has this, who maybe on a web team could help us from a marketing team learn this language faster, or how do we see the difference between these two? Because there's different methods in Salesforce Marketing Cloud's AMP script versus the way Liquid is built. And that's just calling out the big change there. So without further delay, well, that looks weird on my screen. I don't know if it looks weird on your screen. There it goes. The three things that you can do to plan for this migration is, one, start that auditing process. Again, we have a workbook that we can share and really understand what's in there now, what's actually active, how are things integrated to Salesforce so that they're documented for the team that is going to handle the actual project of migration, which will certainly be a cross-functional team, to all be speaking the same language on how things are currently set up. The second one is about people planning. So I think we had made mention of this, thinking about roles, resources, teams that are on engineering, teams that are on IT, and really having a good understanding of how you're going to support Braze from a people perspective, because you'll have folks on a campaign team that are email developers. Their jobs won't change apart from some of the learning curve aspects like we talked about for personalization. But there are going to be folks on the team that are like, I spend all my day doing SQL query. What am I going to be doing in the Braze environment? Thinking about those roles and how that time might be shifted or changed. And then on the last piece, which is largely upstream, is thinking about who in IT engineering on the data side really needs to have a good heads up that this is coming, so that it's not like here's all the requirements, get this in your backlog. Like, there needs to be a lot of coordination there. So really start thinking about people. And then the last one, which is a shameless plug, but talk to somebody like a Stitch who has experience on both sides of the fence, who can help you unpack the size, the level of complexity, call out some of the things that you might be challenged with from an organizational perspective or a process perspective, because there is change coming. Stephen, anything to add there? I don't want to lose out on our QA session.
No, I think that last one really is a critical step, right? We understand both of these platforms in detail, and to your point on even the AMP script to liquid conversion, like it's not uncommon for us to just sit down and talk with clients about, well, like, typically when we have this type of loop that's performing this function, not to get too technical within AMP script, like this is how we would represent that in liquid, and how we need to think about it from both a data and operational perspective. It's a really important step.
Cool. ChatGPT is your friend on making a translation between AMP script and Liquid too. Although don't trust it blindly. Let's jump into the QA section. Appreciate everybody's time thus far. Bree, do we have any questions in the QA here?
Yep, we have one that is, can Braze handle huge contact records similar to Salesforce, which is the best suit for enterprise level? Not sure.
Stephen, I defer to you on that. It for sure can. Both managing inbound data, outbound data for message events, feeding into your data warehouse at scale, segmentation at scale, absolutely performs those events at scale very quickly. I'd encourage you to watch the Braze webinar with Wynn Resorts that they had yesterday, where in that webinar, Aaron from Wynn talks about how they turned on Snowflake cloud data ingestion, and within 20 minutes had uploaded billions of records into Braze, ready for segmentation.
Another one is, how does Data Cloud impact planning around the migration? Does it change?
Oh, that's a good question. So for those that aren't aware, I think everybody's probably aware because Salesforce folks have probably talked to you about Data Cloud or the CDP option within the Salesforce. It depends, and I hate to answer with it depends. When we have Braze integrated to a CDP platform, a lot of these CDPs have the same functional type of ways to integrate with activation platforms. So going from segment and particle and parity, like, go down the list, and now Data Cloud is part of that, or like even an Adobe CDP. It's all going to function under the same type of method, but they're all kind of built a little bit differently. So from a Data Cloud perspective, it's probably going to be a lot more closely tied to a broader Salesforce ecosystem. Like, so you've got sales and service, or if you're a specific vertical, you might have financial services cloud and then service cloud. I think the changes that happen with a migration is just thinking about what kind of latency you might have within a Salesforce CDP environment. They've made substantial updates on it, but from 2-3 years ago, it was an emerging CDP on the market that was much more batch oriented, and now they've gotten into this micro batch area where there is a more real-time feed to if Braze is kind of the endpoint, right? It can pass that over, and it can see upstream into the Salesforce environment really well. Anything to add to that, Stephen?
No, I think that was well put, Nick. It is very much it depends on the tech stack and exactly how and when we need to configure those integrations.
Awesome. I think we've got time for one or two more. So if anyone has any, drop in the chat. But we have got another one. What are the biggest differences in marketing team resources between Salesforce and Braze? It's a good one.
Ooh, that is a good one. I think I'd mentioned one in particular is that if you've got somebody on your team that's doing all of the data transformation, so basically the king or the queen of Automation Studio and running SQL query, their role will change. Stephen had mentioned it. Braze does have SQL function. They do have essentially called segment extensions that get into slicing and dicing audiences in greater detail and more kind of the way that Salesforce Marketing Cloud will want to do it, or that resource will want to do it in Salesforce Marketing Cloud. That's one in particular. The other particular resource that I think we've talked about in the past, Stephen, and you can add to this, is you've got to have somebody when you're thinking about event structures. And this came from my past too, when I was an actual end user of Salesforce Marketing Cloud, and we had an application and we had a digital property, like a website property. Like, I didn't have a full understanding. Like, I was into the campaign and management aspect and the campaign operations. I didn't have really an understanding of how event streams really work at the time. And so if you don't have somebody on the team like that understands like how things can happen on the app and how that can feed into a Braze environment, you're going to want to be able to tap somebody that really understands like what's a race condition, even like how does that happen from an event category standpoint, and what can we do with some of the web personalization or the app personalization events that we can stream in through the Braze SDK.
Yeah, I love this question. So given that I had the opportunity to lead operations teams within working within Marketing Cloud and operation teams working within Braze, it's a really key question for me. One of the other things that I've found is, like, as a data focused person, where you are focused on a different type of data modeling, to Nick's point of understanding the event structures and how those things come in, instead of like a relational database normalized structure. So again, technical, but that is a key difference. The other piece is, we had within Salesforce Marketing Cloud, we would have email developers that were constantly doing campaign execution work and sending the, beautiful HTML-driven emails out to customer bases. And that skill set starts to extend within Braze to in-app messaging and content cards, where we have additional channels available to us, where we are intentionally marketing to consumers on their mobile device as a primary channel.
I know we're at time, but we actually have 3 more questions. Do we want to keep going and at least get everyone's questions answered?
Yeah, let's rip them out. And y'all have my email address, and we'll send the recording after too. And a follow up with this deck, so you have that material. So if you have more questions afterwards, feel free to reach out. But yeah, Bree, let's jump into these.
All right. So the next one, it's a good one. Is it similar? Okay, so Braze Sage AI, is it similar to Einstein, and does Sage have similar functionalities?
Steven, I'm gonna kick that one to you.
It certainly has similar functionality: send time optimization, channel optimization. Sage AI has a few other things as well that may be newer in the marketing cloud space that has come out since AI is so new. Obviously, both platforms are going to be releasing, and I'm more focused on Braze right now. So they do have copywriting help for generating content within Braze. And within one of the really interesting pieces I found, we talk about how data gets into Braze, but obviously, like, in order to run an application, you do have a relational data model behind the actual Braze application itself. And Braze allows you to write some queries against that. And they actually have AI that can take natural language and convert that into a SQL query language on your behalf as well, which I thought was really cool. So it's similar for sure. I mean, there's going to be market use cases across the board. But I think, like, both platforms are going to continue to keep a push here, since it's so popular in the market right
now. Awesome. The next one is, can you describe how Stitch and Braze would staff a migration project? Is it only through a partner or directly? And what are the roles the folks have on the migration team?
Yeah, I can cover that one. So Braze has what are known as onboarding and integrations team. Those are folks that essentially you can kind of view them as a Sherpa. Like, they're there to guide you through an implementation migration to Braze. They're on the Braze team. It's essentially an extension of that Braze team, like account team, to help you along the way. Braze also has the partner ecosystem, which Stitch lives in, that can offer augmented type services to that. So and based on kind of whether it's timeline or whether it's capacity, like, we can plug in or a partner can plug in, similar to the Salesforce services environment, right? You've got Salesforce professional services, and you've got a lot of other partners out there. Some of them are really dedicated to certain verticals. Some of them are dedicated to certain portions of the Salesforce platform, like Salesforce Marketing Cloud or MuleSoft or whatever. So it's not dissimilar. And so when it comes to the roles of that migration team, like, our teams from a Stitch perspective, just to give you an idea, is you have your classic, like, solution architect that is leading functional design on how things should work and looking at integrations and looking at data. And you've got what we call technical producers. That is the big kind of disjoint to what Stephen had mentioned on, like, we don't just have email developers. They have to be really good at messaging across all the different channels. So we call them, like, messaging SMEs, because a campaign is now not just an email campaign or an email drip. It is a cross-channel messaging campaign. The other primary resources on our side are going to be a business strategist. That is a mix between, like, a business analyst and a program manager. So the unique skill set there is really understanding the requirements, because we do deal with a lot of what we consider legacy cloud migrations to a different environment, and really having a deep understanding of, like, okay, what are they doing, so that we can translate that to Braze. And they're also really driving the engagement, main points of contact. That's how we do it. I'm sure other partners have a different kind of secret sauce. We think ours is the best. And then augment that with the Braze onboarding services where they are providing some of that Sherpa guidance.
And the last one that's come through is what's the typical implementation and migration timeline?
Oh boy, I knew that one was coming. 2 weeks. No, that's a bad one. You're still listening. I have bad humor. Again, this is one of those dependent questions. Our typical is between like 12 to 20 weeks, so 3 to 4 or 5 months. But a lot of that is dependent on volume, complexity of campaigns, complexity of data structures, and some of the things we had mentioned on like what else is happening if there's big data projects. But the Braze onboarding is pretty quick. Now, if you're sitting out there and you're Charles Schwab or Fidelity or somebody, I would not answer the same way because I know there's a lot of, from a financial services perspective, a lot of complexity that goes in there. So caveat that if you are a Fidelity out there and saying you said 3 to 4 months, don't take me on that.
Awesome. I think that wraps up our questions. So thank you guys. And like Nick said, feel free to email nick@stitch.cx with any additional questions, or you can come through our website, stitch.cx as well. And we're happy to follow up.
Cool. Thanks, y'all. Thanks for joining.